I'm Ian Shuttleworth from the Queen's University of Belfast, so I'll talk a little bit about the NILS, but really, this is your day, not ours. So the real thing there is it's the Northern Ireland longitudinal study with a glance to Scotland, and in fact it's rather more than just a glance to Scotland. And the basic sort of point I want to begin with is that we're actually probably the most junior of the LSs in the UK at present. But we're very much part of a family, and the Scottish longitudinal study has been actually important in our development in terms of making a case to have an LS in Northern Ireland. And of course, the cry that always goes up, they can link data like this in Scotland. If they can do it in Scotland, why can't they do it in Northern Ireland? So the point I want to make to begin with is that what happens over here in Scotland has all sorts of direct and indirect impacts in terms of the other longitudinal studies and in terms of them operating together as a family of studies. So just by being here, there's a real benefit that extends beyond Scotland. But also in the way that you've progressed data linkage, it's helped us to make cases, because if you can do it here, why not do it somewhere else? Of course, there's more to it than that, but it at least allows us to begin to do that. And of course, since 2012, since the last round of funding, the LSs have worked increasingly closely across the UK as well, in more formal terms, in promotion, in methodology, in terms of certain procedures. So, of course, in Northern Ireland, we've got links as well with Scotland and, of course, with England and Wales too. But again, what happens here and the progress that you make helps us to make progress. And hopefully what we do will help you to do stuff as well, and we'll add things together. And, of course, notable highlights include the development of synthetic data, which was a cross-LS project, but which one element, well, in fact, one of the major elements was led from here. And of course the work on the e-data shield methodology. But it goes beyond that as well, actually, in terms of what we do together. So there have been research projects that have used data from the NILS and the SLS together, and indeed the ONS LS too. I mean, I've got a PhD student who's working on transport and commuting, and she's done work using the NILS in Northern Ireland, and she's done some work in Scotland as a comparator case with a different settlement structure, but with some of the same issues, but other issues that differ. So even if you're not doing sort of linked up, joined up statistical analyses, doing stuff that's comparative still has its benefits. And of course there are other projects which have been done. I've got the synthetic data study there, but there's been sort of, substantive studies which led to a publication there in Health and Place. Is that what you're going to speak about, David? So it's really prefiguring that, so you'll hear about that later on this afternoon. And I think actually there's considerable scope for expanding cross-UK comparative studies in a variety of thematic areas, because there's natural experiments here to do with devolution, different environments, and we're not sure where the UK is going, but there's similarities and differences. So we can tease out quite a lot. We can start to play with quite a lot. So a lot of similarities between Northern Ireland and Scotland, but also some key differences. So I think maybe we can do more of that sort of work. But there are significant differences. And this is really where I just tell you a little bit about the NILS for those who aren't familiar with the NILS. And it's important perhaps in understanding the parameters for cross-LS work and understanding the opportunities and also understanding some of the challenges. And we differ from the other LSs, for example, in terms of sample fraction. I said sample size there, but it's actually sample fraction, which is the sort of more accurate term. The start date of the first data linkage that we've got, some differences in access conditions, and some differences in the sorts of data that we link. So there's opportunities and challenges posed by that. I'll look briefly at those in the next slides and hopefully not bore you to tears with them. So I think the key sort of thing about the Northern Ireland situation, well, there's three key things. One, the spine of the data is basically based on the health card registration system. So census data are linked to that. The other key thing is that it's a large sample, circa 28%, 104 birth dates out of 365. And there's good reasons for that. If we had a 5% sample in Northern Ireland or a 1% sample in Northern Ireland, we couldn't really do too much with the data. So we need a whacking big sample fraction that we can work with. And the other thing as well is that there is a Northern Ireland mortality study, which is the link between the census and deaths. So it's a way to link census data to mortality events after each census, so to study that in depth, and that's a 100% coverage. So there's a slightly different sort of way in which we operate and which we're configured. But there are some similarities. So that's roughly how things go there. So there are NILS databases which have got contributions from the health card system, linkages from the censuses, and we go back to 1981, but I asterisk it there because it's a partial sort of linkage. It's not partial in terms of the coverage, but it's partial in terms of the variables that are incorporated. And if you want to ask me about that afterwards, you can do, or ask me in the pub about it. But I can tell a little bit about that. We also link in data from the property system, house valuations, and of course we get household characteristics from the census. And because of the linkage and the base in the healthcare system, we can access quite a lot of health and social care data as well. So that's actually quite sort of handy for us to have all that. But it's the usual thing, there's a lot of data, and you make the case to get a data extract, which is provided by NISRA research support officers. This really just expands a little bit on that. You all know what's in the census. You all know about vital events data. I suppose the things to draw to your attention there really that are most important are the dates. So that's the dates of the linkage that we have now. For example, new births into the sample from 1974 onwards, births to sample members from 1974 onwards. So we have that information there. Capital and rating value. And we've recently got data added in terms of pollution and in terms of weather, which I think is a new addition at grid resolution. I've got a question mark there about education because that's a perennial subject that keeps bubbling along. But I think actually we may be getting near to being able to draw educational data from the school system into the NILS. But I'm not confident how near we are to getting that. But the key things are the dates. You all know what the census has, and you all know what the vital registration system captures. So it's just the dates, and that's what we have available to us now in the NILS. It's expanded substantially. So I got involved in this in 2011. In terms of the number of censuses and the data linked, it's grown quite a lot over the past X number of years. And it's really down to the work of a lot of other people. So all credit to them for the support and work that they've done. Accessing the NILS, pretty standard actually for those of you who use the longitudinal studies. That's our web page, which gives you a guide there to accessing the NILS. Probably the only thing which is a little bit different to the experience in Scotland and England and Wales is that in terms of making an application, it has to have health relevance because of the basis of the spine of the data. So it's got to have health, it's got to have a health element in it. But it doesn't have to be really explicit or the major thing or the main thing. But there's got to be some reference to health. But a lot of things have got some relevance to public health and to the well-being of the population. So understanding migration, say, has relevance to that. But you've got to couch things in those terms. What has the NILS been used for, and how different is it to the SLS? Aha! So, I was messing about with some free word cloud software, and this is actually using the titles of articles from the citation database that Fiona produced late last month. So, I took out the words Northern Ireland, I took out the words Scotland and Scottish, because otherwise you saw Northern Ireland and Scotland and Scottish. And I took the titles of articles that have been produced, that have come out in journals, and pull the things out there that actually are coming out in them. So what do we see for Northern Ireland? We see mortality as a big thing, which is not perhaps that surprising given the focus of our study. We see census-based, we see religion, we see health. So we see those things coming out quite strongly in terms of our output. The projects, in fact, that we've supported, that they do range from a lot of health projects, but also projects that have looked at things like segregation, that have looked at fertility, that have looked at labour market change, that have looked at social mobility. But perhaps not so surprising, given the way that we operate. We've got those names there. In fact, I can't really see them because I haven't got my glasses on. If I've got my glasses on, I can't see the screen. So, but anyway, there's a Scottish one. I don't know why we've got mortality twice there, but then again, it is free software, so there are some similarities, you know, and you can't expect too much. But there are differences: evidence, European, inequalities, and analysis and population. So maybe just a slightly different sort of output in comparison in terms of the journal titles than we see in Northern Ireland. So I just thought to say, you know, what's it been used for? And those are the things it's been used for, as far as I can tell from my free software, which does word clouds. Next steps. Well, my next steps will be to get off the stage. But in terms of the next steps of the longitudinal study, we're very interested in Northern Ireland in trying to expand our usage among postgraduate and undergraduate education. So we want to try to do that. So to tie it into quantitative teaching, quantitative initiatives in the universities like QSTEP. So we want to try to do that. We've got an idea of omnibus projects where an experienced instructor can sign on students as co-investigators on a certain topic and where they can conduct research under their guidance. So we want to see whether we can start to do that. We want to expand the outreach of the NILS to the voluntary sector and try to get more work done there if we can do. And of course, reaching out to government departments such as health. And we are looking, of course, like everybody else, to the 2021 census and other data linkages, both in extending the temporal reach of the NILS, but also its sort of topic breadth as well. And of course, the question mark there is more cross-LS research, to which I would probably say, yes, please, if people want to do that. Yes. So that finishes me. Thank you very much.